You know when you're scrolling through the news and you see a headline about some fascinating new study? Have you ever stopped and thought, wait a second, how did they figure that out? Where does all that knowledge actually come from? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and peek inside the social scientist toolkit to find out.
Right. This question right here. This is the whole ballgame. The answer is a process, a really systematic one, called data collection. It's the absolute bedrock of all research. It's how we go from a simple question, like, does this new program actually help people, to getting real, concrete, evidence-based answers.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the big picture, this quest for data. Then we'll look at the first major choice researchers have to make, surveys or field research. From there, we'll zoom in on a super powerful tool, the interview, and look at all the different flavors it comes in. And finally, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how you actually conduct a great interview. Let's do this.
At its heart, social science is really just about understanding us, people, our behavior, our societies, our cultures. But you can't just guess about that stuff. To study people properly, researchers need a solid, structured way to gather information.
And it all boils down to this one fundamental question. This is the first and maybe the most important decision a researcher makes, because the method they choose is going to shape absolutely everything that comes after, what they can ask, who they can talk to, and what kind of conclusions they can come to at the end. Get this part right, and you're on your way to some solid research.
So let's talk about that first big decision. You can think of it as a fork in the road. Does the researcher want to cast a really wide net and get a little bit of information from a lot of people? Or do they want to do a super deep dive and get a ton of information from a smaller group? This brings us to our two main approaches, survey research and field research.
First up is survey research. This is the bird's eye view. Think about those big national opinion polls you hear about, or maybe a company sending out a feedback form to thousands of its customers. You've probably taken a survey yourself. The key is that you're asking a whole bunch of people the exact same questions, so you can get a reliable snapshot of what that large group thinks or does.
And then you have the complete opposite, field research. This is the boots-on-the-ground approach. Instead of a wide net, you're using a magnifying glass. Imagine an anthropologist living with a remote tribe for a year, or a sociologist working undercover in a factory to understand the life of the workers. It's not about big numbers. It's all about rich, deep, contextual understanding. You're right there, in the middle of it all.
This little chart breaks down the trade-offs really nicely. Surveys are all about scale, which lets you generalize your findings to a bigger population. Field research, on the other hand, gives you incredible depth and really descriptive details. So look, if you want to know what percentage of the country supports a new policy, a survey is your go-to tool. But if you want to know why a specific neighborhood feels so tight-knit, well, that's when you do field research. It's never about which one is better. It's about picking the right tool for the question you're asking.
But here's the cool thing. Whether a researcher is casting that wide net or doing that deep dive, there is one tool that shows up almost everywhere, and that's the interview. It's just the most direct way to hear something from someone's own perspective. Now, this can happen face-to-face, over the phone, or these days, probably over a video call. But the goal is always the same: to have a purposeful conversation that unlocks what we call qualitative data. That's the good stuff. The thoughts, the feelings, the stories, and experiences that numbers and spreadsheets just can't capture. Okay, but saying interview is kind of like saying car. There are a lot of different models, right? Researchers have a whole range of options to choose from. You can think of it like a spectrum, from something that's super rigid and scripted, all the way to something that feels like a totally natural, free-flowing conversation. Let's break those down. On one end of that spectrum, you've got the structured interview. This is basically a questionnaire that's read out loud. Every single person gets the exact same questions in the exact same order with the exact same wording. No going off script. This is perfect for survey research when you need to be able to compare the answers from hundreds or even thousands of people.
Now let's swing all the way to the other end, the unstructured interview. Here, the researcher might just have a couple of general topics they want to cover, but there's no set script. It's all about letting the conversation flow. This is where you make amazing discoveries. You find out about things you didn't even know you should have been asking about in the first place.
Then there's another flavor entirely, the focus group. This is where you get a small group of people, say 6 to 12, together in a room with a moderator to talk about a specific topic. It's fantastic for brainstorming or for seeing how people's ideas bounce off of each other and evolve in a social setting.
Of course, focus groups have their ups and downs. The big advantage is you can get a whole bunch of different opinions really efficiently. But there's a risk of groupthink.
where one or two loud people dominate the conversation or others are afraid to share an unpopular opinion, so you have to be careful.
But no matter what type of interview it is, its power really lives in the questions themselves. Let's take a look at a really simple, closed-ended question, like this one. It's direct, it's efficient, you get a simple yes or no. It gives you a clean data point that's super easy to count and analyze.
Now, compare that simple yes-no to this question. See the difference? This isn't asking for a checkbox answer. It's an invitation. It's asking for their views, their opinions, their feelings, all in their own words. This is how you get those rich, juicy, detailed insights that really make a research project come alive.
All right, so we've covered the what and the why. Now let's get into the how. So you can think of this next part as kind of like the user manual for doing a great interview, because it's not just about showing up and asking questions. It takes some serious planning to do it right.
First things first, you have to ask, who is actually conducting this interview? Should it be the head researcher, a professionally trained interviewer? You have to think about things like trust. I mean, will an interviewer's age or gender or even their accent affect how open a person is willing to be? It absolutely can. Next up, the where. The setting is a huge deal. If you interview someone in a big, formal, scary-looking office, they might just clam up. But if you do it in a comfortable, neutral space, maybe even their own home or a quiet coffee shop, you're going to get much more open and honest answers.
And finally, this one seems so simple, but it's absolutely crucial: the when. You have to respect the person's time. Finding a time that is genuinely convenient for them shows respect, it builds rapport, and it just sets the whole interview off on the right foot.
Now, here's a pro move that no good researcher ever skips: the pilot test. You can think of it as a full dress rehearsal. Before you launch the real study, you run through the entire interview process with a small group of people. This is your chance to find out if any questions are confusing, if it's taking too long, or if your audio recorder isn't working right. You iron out all the kinks before they have a chance to mess up your real data.
And this quote here really brings it all home. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're using a survey or field research or an in-depth interview. The goal is always the same: to get trustworthy information. The data has to be valid, meaning it actually measures what you think you're measuring, and it has to be reliable, meaning if someone else did it, they'd get similar results.
So there you have it. You've had a peek inside the researcher's toolkit. You can see how much careful thought goes into gathering the information that helps us understand our world a little bit better. So I'll just leave you with this question. If you had access to all these tools, what would you want to find out? What's the one burning question you'd want to answer? Thanks for joining me.